Jonathan,
Hey there.
welcome back to the CTO studio, man.
Oh, thank you for having me back.
You're not in your house,
I am in my house, actually. Yes.
but company policy is banners in the background.
I'm fully branded today. That's really the key thing is as a CTO, you're ultimately a brand ambassador. And so I must have logos placed everywhere. Um, I
I
even
think
have
that was a
tattoos all
key.
over. Just kidding.
I think that's why your CEO approved a membership was that you would be
Yeah.
fully branded at all times.
It was a
I
critical
love it.
component of the agreement.
I'll take you anywhere you come, Jonathan.
Awesome.
Um, so Mission still doing well. How are things going in 2020?
It's I will say this, as with most people, things have not gone to plan for Mission, right? However, I think, we've had a really great year in many respects. It required us to do some very quick pivoting to kind of adapt to the changes that were going on in the universe, but we're having a record year and growing very, very quickly and doing fantastically as a business. So I cannot complain. I am definitely being kept very busy.
How have you CTO'd those changes?
Well, one of the critical things is as CTO, when I joined, I made sure that I owned the product function at Mission. And to me, that is one of my favorite parts. Like, I am a technologist, but I'm really very much a product person at heart. And when you're adapting to changes in the market, there's no better place to be than knee deep in product, right? And we did some really great work on that front. Put out some programs that are all about kind of cost saving initiatives for companies on AWS, and we have been growing like mad on that, right? So just took them quick innovation.
So a typical product then would be a tool to help like calculate cost and reduce that.
So we are kind of a technology-enabled services business, right? And so our products are mostly a combination of people and tools and processes, right? And so we're partnered with some great vendors who do the tooling part usually. And the magic from Mission really comes around we are experts at implementing those things, providing insights, and providing services around it, right? And so we use, for example, we use Cloud Health for our cloud management platform, which is a fantastic tool, sort of like Cost Explorer on steroids, the AWS Cost Explorer. And then we have, cloud analysts that actually meet with our customers on a regular basis. They go through all the recommendations, build out custom reports and all sorts of good stuff, right? So it's that magical combination of, we know what we're doing. We've got a great team of people who are experts on all these tools and the cloud platforms, and then putting that all together so that companies don't have to do that themselves. As a CTO, that's like one of my biggest obstacles always is getting my teams trained up on tools, getting them to be experts in any particular piece of technology. So that's really resonated with other CTOs I've talked to, right? Is, hey, we're a shortcut for you.
Yeah. No, I think so. I recently took a CTO gig, and one of the first brick walls I faced was the infrastructure. Mostly because the infrastructure seems to be held up in either one person's brain, or or it's sort of become this mutant that people have slapped things onto to facilitate growth. But the rhyme or reason as to it's sort of this thing that you just keep building. It's like a raft. It's like a
Yeah.
raft with barrels and pieces of wood and just just a messy, ugly, horrible thing as you
Yeah.
sail into this beautiful lake.
If you thought technical debt was easy to get into when you had to order servers and rack them and stack them and provision them, just imagine what technical debt can turn into when you can literally with an API call provision new infrastructure. And you're right, right? That's what happens is people they just go about their day solving their problems and they're not thinking like at a big level strategically like what's going on, right? Am I going to be on budget here, right? Is this the right way to be doing this? And then nobody ever revisits it either. It's just sort of like, okay, problem solved, check, move on, and yeah,
So
it's
so
exhausting.
what so what at Mission did you do you do companies need to be a certain size before they should be using a DevOps as a service, or should DevOps as a service companies try get in as early as possible, as cheap as possible, so that you can grow with a company?
I would say that there's not like a hard and fast rule on this, but I think, so for context, we do work with a lot of startups, right, who have very small teams, and we're, really providing kind of their trusted advisory kind of DevOps services for them. And we represent maybe the majority of or all of their team. But we work with other customers who are big enterprises who have, massive teams, and they're leaning on our expertise less than our effort, right? So it really depends where you are on the life cycle. I would say it usually doesn't come down to size of company. It comes down to budget. I think any company would benefit from partnering with an expert from a DevOps perspective, especially if you don't have enough capacity in-house, which every single time I talk to, a company about, do you have enough great DevOps talent, available in in-house? And they're always like, no, never. It's never there, right? So to me, if you can afford it, it's worth doing. And I think the other key thing is it's really hard to retain good talent right now. People talk about, the market in 2020 and with COVID, what's happening. Honestly, DevOps people are in hot demand still, right? There's no real, there were some corrections earlier in the year, but at this point, it still remains extremely hot market, very difficult to retain people. So we kind of represent a way to de-risk a little bit. It's like I have 3 people internally or 5 people internally. I can lose 1 or 2 of them, and I still have Mission, at the ready, and they've got a big team. They can always bring in more resources if needed. So, yeah.
So what would you tell the CTO or the startup that has 0 DevOps people, but is clearly they're staging and they're pushing to production in some cloud, but they don't have anyone, there's no DevOps department?
Well, typically, in that circumstance, I feel like a SaaS business in that model. A little startup, you're building out an application. Your developers effectively are your DevOps team, right? It's not like the work isn't getting done. It's just maybe not getting done by people who that's really what they do. And so, I would say, unless you have someone at least watching what's going on, there's a good chance that you're digging yourselves some holes that you're going to pay for later. So you don't have to go full on into a situation where you're, engaging with a company like Mission to kind of run your DevOps for you. But you could start out with just some like advisory service, right? Like just come in and, do some assessments, tell me where I'm, headed, what I need, and then make a decision from there. But I think I've been in that situation before at a very small startup. You're really focused on solving the customer problem, not solving my own internal issues and really, automation and things like that. But it really quickly will transition. And if your product becomes successful, you don't want to have to slow down. That's like the worst possible thing to do when you're just releasing product to market, to have to slow down and stop. You want to ride that as much as possible. And if you don't have all of the skids greased, as they say, right, you're going to just have all that friction and it's going to hold you back. So it does cost money, but I think it's totally worth it. You need to have a strategy in place. You need to have a plan. You don't have to be fully staffed up, but you do need to know what your blueprint is. Like, what's my plan and strategy here?
Yeah, I think it's ironic for me that there's a reluctance to budget for it, because I think there's a perception that it's just something that maybe it's hard for people to visualize what the money is being spent on. But I think you and I know that this is a brilliant virtualization of something that used to require tremendous effort to provision. But I think with that ease, it comes across as something that shouldn't be paid for or shouldn't be budgeted for.
Right.
It's strange.
It is strange, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about how companies tend to make decisions, right? They're thinking about sort of like what problems are right in front of them. And, usually they're thinking about, I want to make sure that I'm building the right product. And so there's generally less reluctance to invest in things like engineering around development, right? And design and product and things of that notion. But when you get to like operations, it's sort of like putting a new roof on your house, right? It's like, I don't really want to do this. But at the end of the day, when rain starts to fall down on you, that's when you're like, well, now I need a roof. And it's like, yeah, but it's not too late, but everything becomes much more difficult now. And I think, we talked earlier about how Mission had to do a big pivot earlier in the year, right? And every company has to go through these kinds of things. Doing big pivots and making rapid change based upon evolving markets and new things going on in the world requires you to be able to turn on a dime. And if you have no DevOps, if you have no strategy there and you don't have the ability to have automation and monitoring and, you don't have a good beat on that, it's going to be a lot harder to turn on a dime, right? And so to me, it's like it's an investment in your own agility, right? And your own ability to pivot quickly and make the changes necessary to not only survive during times like this, but to really have a record year like Mission is, right?
Yeah, so to prepare companies, then you need someone like a professional or like an expert, like a CTO, to prepare the company for that type of expense and projecting out that expense.
Absolutely.
Is that who you work with? Is CTOs?
It depends on the company. Frequently, it is the CTO. Very frequently. Occasionally, it'll be somebody who kind of reports into the CTO, or maybe the chief operations officer or the CIO, kind of depending on the engagement. But we usually work with whoever runs the DevOps team and the infrastructure team or engineering team at our customer. That's who our point of contact tends to be.
So my concern at this moment as the CTO of a company is, what am I not doing? What do I don't know that I don't know? You're talking about trends and changes and all that's going on right now, and so notwithstanding the pandemic, but things are humming along. Every now and again we run out of disk space, as an example.
Yeah.
Oh, we have to quickly work on this stuff. I'm assuming that is the worst possible way to go about your infrastructure. So I just have this feeling of unease, like how do I know that what I'm not looking at and what I should be looking at, and I should be bringing in a DevOps company, or I should be leaving this up to the professionals, versus sending everyone for AWS certification and
right.
And hopefully, am I going the auto scaling route, or am I going the Kubernetes route? Am I going the so is it, how do I as a CTO know that I'm not doing this wrong?
I think the key, that's a great, how is that not on the mind of every single CTO in the world? Like, it's, I definitely struggle with that too. And to me, the thing that always gives me comfort as a CTO is when I feel like I'm proactive and in control. When I'm having to be reactive most of the time in my behavior, so I'm seeing disks fill up and having to react and go and resolve, right? Or I'm running out of infrastructure kind of resources available and I'm having to manually scale things up, right? These are things that I don't want to have to be doing because it makes me, it keeps me up at night. It distracts my mind from all sorts of things that I should be thinking about, like how can I maximize, this business opportunity that I have? I've got a great product. I've got good product market fit. I don't want to be fighting battles for things that should just be handled, right? Like, am I following best practices? And the challenge with that is there's so much to fit in your head and it's really hard to be able to handle it all, right? There's too many things to consider. So that's why I do think it's been really exciting for me to be in the partner space as a technology partner to companies that are struggling with this. Is at the end of the day, I love nothing more than consulting with companies and helping them understand technology and how to best leverage it for their needs. And so, having a trusted advisor, and that doesn't have to be a company like Mission. It can be, if you're a very small business and you can't afford to bring on a full-time CTO, get a fractional CTO, right? If you have a CTO, but they're very busy running the product, kind of an engineering organization, work with a partner, hire. These are all, you have to make an investment somewhere though, right?
Yeah, no, I get that. I think generally there's an unease in my mind when things are just humming along. It's like, what do I don't know is actually going on?
Yeah, for sure.
So are there some are there some trends that you sort of can think of or share with me on sort of what you're noticing? You especially as you as a company have had to adjust. Are there some things happening in the infrastructure land that you're noticing as an important thing for people to maybe know?
Yeah, I think a couple trends that are happening, and a lot of it does relate back to COVID. And I know everyone gets exhausted about talking about it over and over again, and that's fine, right? But these pressures that are created, they're real, and we do have to react to them, right? And so some trends that I'm seeing is we're seeing a big uptick in migrations. So people are saying like, okay, I was putting off on migrating out of my on-prem environment and moving into the cloud. But maybe they have a hardware renewal coming up, like they have to refresh all of their gear, and that's going to be a big capital expense. Now's a good time to make that investment and to move from, these big CapEx expenses to an OpEx model, transitioning and migrating to AWS, right? So we're seeing a lot of that. We're also seeing people really discovering very quickly that I didn't really have a handle on my costs. I thought I did, but now I'm being asked by my investors or, just by my accounting and finance team to reduce costs, right? I have to cut 15% of cost or I'm gonna have to let some people go. And so that's a huge trend right now as well, which is why we really leaned into our cost optimization services early in the year. It's like, this is what companies need right now. We have the expertise. Let's offer it to them. Get them a fix as quickly as possible. So those are two big trends. And then I think the third big trend are re-architectures that are designed to reduce overall operational expense, right? To drive efficiency. And those re-architecture, those things, containerization is a big thing that's happening right now, right? So companies are looking at like, okay, I've got kind of maybe a legacy architecture or, I'm not taking full advantage of all the technology that's available to me. Maybe if I can containerize my application, bust it up, maybe create, move from a monolith into microservices, I can more independently scale these things. I can have teams that are smaller and more dedicated. And so we're seeing a lot of that as well. Projects are on containerization. So those are probably the three biggest things. Oh, and then other things in that same bucket with the containerization are things like adopting RDS, right? And so maybe they have a self-managed database and they're like, what am I wasting my time doing this? I don't want to have a DBA on staff spending all their time monitoring and managing, my MySQL cluster, right? Just turn on RDS, point to the endpoint, let AWS handle it for you. Same thing with, all their other managed services, Elasticache, and, just I could go on and on and on. Moving to managed services.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, and if we talk about the brutally early startups, i.e., let's just define them as 2 million ARR and below.
Yep.
That's not brutally early, but that's still pretty small. I think that there's this constant struggle with the CTO to want to do things themselves and having to understand everything, and why I'm such a huge fan of shifting to the experts even when it's a bit uncomfortable or it feels a bit early, is you are nurturing that mindset that the specialists, the ones who eat, sleep and drink this kind of stuff, will just provide you with 20x the type of knowledge and expertise than you buying AWS for dummies and you saying, well, I'm the CTO, I should be doing this stuff, or I should know this stuff.
Right. Yeah, and it might be, it's not always the wrong move for your team to become the experts on infrastructure, right? But it often isn't. And I think that's the biggest struggle. Like, I've been CTO of a very small startup on several occasions, and when you are in that environment, you have significant constraints, right? And you have to look at the team that you have and say, okay, what are our core competencies? What are our unique differentiating skill sets that can set us apart? Everything else has to become not a focus, and you need to find a way to either make it something you either A, don't do, if it's possible, or B, someone else does for you who is an expert. And most startups that we encounter now, there are a lot of them out there doing SaaS applications. They're building out, products in with very clear market needs, and they need to be really, really good at understanding their customer, understanding the problems that they're facing, and solving those problems for the customer. What the customer doesn't care is, how do you run your infrastructure? The customer cares that the application is up and running 24 hours a day and is performant, right? And so, if you have limited investment, deploy that capital on things that are going to matter the most to your customer, right? And the things that you can be uniquely differentiated and that you have the skill sets to handle.
So true.
Right? And that's why it's okay. It's okay you can't fit everything in your head anymore. It's impossible, right? It's okay to say,
and I think
I have a guy for that.
Yes, and I think such a critical function of the role of CTO is to decide what technology is the competitive advantage and what isn't.
Right.
And work on building the moat around the competitive advantage, but please don't do any work on the other stuff. And I think that's kind of where I'm headed with that thinking.
For sure. Yeah, and the most common mistake I'm seeing right now is people at very small startups becoming Kubernetes experts. That's a huge mistake in my opinion, right? Like if I'm not saying Kubernetes is bad, Kubernetes is fantastic, but it is big and it is complicated. And are you really adding value? Like there are other ways to solve this problem. Are you, a lot of times people can just do something a little bit simpler. They can use ECS or they can use EKS, right? You don't have to run your own Kubernetes cluster. Not every problem requires that huge sledgehammer of complexity, right? You might just be able to, do things simpler. That's okay.
No, I get that. So Kubernetes, what is Kubernetes?
Oh no, that is a very dangerous question because I have like 1,000 snarky answers to that. But I would say
let me just preface that with saying I'm a late bloomer when it comes to containerization and actually finally understanding what it does, or actually how to be. Sometimes when you learn a new programming language and you're like, I can do all the hello world examples and I get it, but I need to do something with it. Like right. When am I going to actually code something with this? And with containerization and Docker, it's like, okay, I get it. I've run the little hello world, instance and all that. But now, how am I deploying this? And I found one of the very useful ways of doing it is through lambdas and sort of thinking about life that way. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a late bloomer to containerization and serverless. I still feel afraid to admit to people that I don't really, really understand what Kubernetes is. And so I feel a little vulnerable in admitting that to you, but
it is okay. I would say a significant percentage of the people who run Kubernetes don't fully understand what Kubernetes is, right? But let me break it down for you in pretty simple terms. And I think it might be interesting to start with just containers as a concept, right? Like I remember, so containers have been around before Docker, but I think Docker is the thing that really caused containers to take off. And why is that the case? Like what, in your view, what was the thing that got people excited about Docker, right?
Yeah, I think I don't think people knew why they got excited about Docker. I think for me, my initial thought was, wow, we don't have to worry about dev environments anymore. There's no worrying about different environments.
You're onto it, right? So the key innovation of Docker was finding a way to transform the typical engagement between developers and infrastructure and deployment and making it super simple and really designed to delight them. The thing that made Docker successful was it spoke to developers and their workflow. It is works on my machine as a package and ship it to production, right? Like that's what got people excited. And then, so that's containers in a nutshell to me, right? Is I can package something up in a way that I know it works and I can ship it around and I've got that mobility, right? Kubernetes is the logical endpoint of that, where, okay, now I'm going to go through and I want to start breaking my application down into microservices. I'm going to break it out into smaller and smaller components that I can containerize those components. And then when you have a large-scale system with many of these different microservices that all have to be orchestrated and communicate together, that turns out to be a very large challenge and a very big problem. So we solved one problem, and we created a dozen new ones. And Kubernetes is designed to solve all of those problems, right? But the key thing about that is you don't necessarily, like, how many people really have a scale at which they require something like Kubernetes? So Kubernetes brands themselves as a platform for deploying, managing, scaling containerized applications at scale, right? At massive scale. So it was born at Google, right? These are people who are not running little rinky-dink workloads, right? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with the rinky-dink workload. Like, the vast majority of business, it's the same challenge that I hear from people who, I took over a business, or the engineering team at a business a couple of years back, where their entire platform was written in Perl, which is not the most modern language, right, or popular language. And, but it was funny because I had some engineers on the team that were making fun of an application that was written in PHP. They're like, oh, haha, PHP, right? Nobody uses PHP. I'm like, folks, you do realize we use Perl, right? Number one. Number two, you do realize that like 80% of the internet is held together with chicken wire and duct tape with, crazy Perl and terrible PHP and JavaScript. And like, that's how the internet works. Okay. Like, I mean, it would be shocking when most people learn about like how networking works at scale and things like BGP, like you should be terrified all the time about everything. Right. But where am I going with this? The point is, most of the time, Kubernetes is like I said, a logical conclusion to solve a bunch of problems that we created for ourselves by taking advantage of containers and then, going wild with them. And there are certainly applications where you've got a large amount of discovery and interconnectedness and a bunch of different microservices that when you glue them all together, create a workload. Kubernetes is ideal for that, right? But most workloads aren't that, and it's okay to be simpler. That's fine.
So you, for instance, will have, so if I just look at the single thread, you package up your container, you publish it to is it, I think, like EKR or something?
Elastic Container Registry, ECR, yeah.
ECR. And, oh yes, EKS, right? Or is it?
EKS is the Elastic Kubernetes Service. That's
Okay.
AWS is like, we're running Kubernetes for you at scale, right? And you just push to it.
So would Kubernetes then just be, instead of thinking of your app as a single Docker instance, it is actually just a ton of them doing different things, like in a microservices environment?
Yeah, the long and short of it is, and I'll caveat all this by saying I'm also not a Kubernetes expert. I know enough to be dangerous here, and definitely encountered it a lot. So, but effectively, think about it this way: you're defining independent services, right? And you're grouping them together, and you're allowing the services to do things like discover each other, right? So you don't have to say, you basically can create these pods, and you can create IP addresses for them, and you can create DNS names for a series of these things, and you can load balance them. It's doing, things like healing and scaling and the topology of your services, really providing you with all of that substrate. But it's kind of, frankly, it's pretty boring when you really think about what it's doing under the hood. It's orchestration. It isn't doing anything that is actually solving any problems for your end users. It's purely designed to solve problems for you. I want to smoothly scale, deploy, heal, roll out a very large scale service that has many, many, many microservices that make it up, right?
So is Kubernetes something that can also then be defined by something like a Terraform script or a...
Oh, yeah.
So it's...
You can definitely use infrastructure as code to provision things, and I would say, and Terraform, for example, actually is an infrastructure as code provider that has a whole bunch of different like capabilities to extend and plug in and add new capabilities, and so people have done a lot with Kubernetes with Terraform. So absolutely.
Yeah, so that's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that. I feel less incompetence.
Yeah, there's actually, well, first of all, you're not incompetent for, the fact that frankly, most people don't need to know how Kubernetes works, right? Like the vast majority of people do not need to know, including CTOs, right? Like I think it's a good idea to understand it because it very well could be a good fit for a workload that you encounter. But, you are not in the minority when it comes to that level.
Could it be? Is it so? Even if I am a small company, and is it potentially best practice to start off with Kubernetes then as a infrastructure or as a way to think about your deployment, so that you are prepared and you're sort of growing. You're not having to shift. Like, what is the paradigm, the DevOps paradigm that is just plain good old best practice?
Yeah.
To kick anything off that might feel like overkill in the beginning, but actually will serve you pretty quickly as you grow.
Yeah, I do not think that it's necessary to start with Kubernetes as a given at the beginning of a project, right? It might be the right choice, and many times it's not. I would say, honestly, a lot of the same old way that we approach problems as technologists when it comes to application architecture are very, very similar now as they were before. It's just that some of the atomic building blocks are a little bit different and that parts of them can be outsourced as well. So, like we talk about the database layer, right? You used to have to think a lot more about the database layer than I think you do now, because you can do things like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to plonk in RDS here, or maybe I'm going to use Dynamo or whatever, right? Maybe not the best example, but I think starting from a position of, yes, I'm going to containerize, that's totally appropriate. And if you're starting from there, getting to Kubernetes is definitely not like, it's not like you're going to have to start over when you get to the endpoint. Building out an application with sane architecture around microservices with, kind of discrete, components that are walled off from one another and know what they're responsible for. You can do that in a way with very simple, kind of atomic bits and pieces and building blocks with containers. And then later you can adopt Kubernetes as you start to want to glue them together and scale them and all of that. But you don't necessarily have to. And you brought up Lambda earlier. I think that people are often going to have better luck starting off from a position like that, right? And then using something like Lambda or using ECS even, like a more simple container service that AWS provides with Fargate, right? Which is kind of quote unquote serverless, on that front. And you can get really, really far with that. And the kind of cognitive load is significantly lower than it would be on, now I have to understand Kubernetes, right? Like that's a lot. Most people don't need it. Overkill for most people.
Yeah, and I think in the end, I like what you said earlier, which was delighting your engineers. I think there are a few things as demoralizing as when you're onboarding someone and you just cannot get the local dev environments to work, or writing or solving a problem and then having it work in one environment and not another is. Right. So I can see how those tools, I love how that seeing Docker as that solution to the developer sort of struggle, I think is a great way to look at that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Lambda is the new delight the developer, right? Remember that aha moment with Docker with developers, 15 years ago or however long it's been, 10 years? That's what Lambda is now, in my view, right? It is super exciting. It leaps above and beyond the excitement that I got when I first tried Docker as a developer. Now, Lambda really gets me excited, right? And I think people would be more, I think investing in that, right, and serverless is actually, a better use of your developer's time than learning about how Kubernetes works. Right?
That's helpful. I think with Lambda, and maybe you can help me with this. With Lambda, you're tying it to a port or an access, like it's kind of like it's an API endpoint, right? Or are there other types of Lambdas?
So, in the simplest way to put it is a Lambda is a chunk of code written in some language that's supported by AWS or by some custom runtime for Lambda that can be triggered as the result of an event, right? So it's event driven. That's a key thing. Now, you can build a web service on top of Lambda. You would wire it up to the API gateway in AWS, and the event would be, I received a request, right? An HTTP request, and then you can receive that event in Lambda and process it. But the event can be any number of things that happen inside of AWS. So things like a new object has landed in this S3 bucket.
In S3, yes.
Right?
Or a message, the message queue can execute a Lambda.
Exactly. Something came off of a queue, or something happened in my Kinesis stream.
I actually had when I coded a little tool a few months ago, a Slack / command that was taking more than 3 seconds to execute the Lambda access through HTTP. And so I had to then introduce the messaging service so that we could get the okay back to Slack as quickly as possible, and then pass along the necessary information to a Lambda to then respond back to Slack when this command was done. And I did that all through Lambdas, and it was wonderful. I felt like a badass.
It really is super empowering to just be like, wait, I just write the code and then tell it when I want it to execute. It just happens. It's like, yeah, that's all you do. Well, how do I scale it? Well, it just scales. Yes, there are nuances and complexities, and yes, there are all sorts of caveats all over the place. But for like a significant amount of stuff that your typical engineer or developer does, a Lambda is just like very much one of those, aha moments.
Yeah, what I found particularly liberating with Lambdas is just the I/O layer or whatever gets handled for you. So you basically have your entry point, and you just have all this structures that you can deal with. You extract what you can, you do something with it, and then you just pump it back out to the I/O. Yep. And I found that to be quite refreshing, so that you're not actually also building those layers into your into your app, or into even into your Docker container. You're still building all those I/O layers in there. With Lambda, you just you don't have to worry about any of that. You just build that yourself. You just, that all gets taken care of for you.
Yeah, it would be, it's really interesting you mentioned that, because the way I often think about this is, if you've ever had a home and had to do a renovation, or had to do maybe you're deciding, I'm going to redecorate my home. I want it to look different. And the thing that's going to delight the people who walk into my house is, new paint on the wall or new furniture or whatever, right? But it would be like walking in and being like, oh, now you know what I'm going to do in order to start. I'm going to start with building out all of the plumbing and electrical in my house, right? That's what a developer, when you're doing things like building out queuing systems and stuff, it's like you're building plumbing. Stop it, right? Paint the wall, put in the couch, right? That's what you're trying to get to. And you're sitting here and you're building the plumbing. It's like the plumbing should be done by somebody else for you and handled, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't do that.
and I think that's what, at least as someone who did that for the first time, the joy I did feel was that I was plugging into a genuinely powerful super highway of I/O, and I could just tag all these little functions into this massive stream, and that becomes, that just becomes the fun part of writing this code. Now, I haven't done it to the degree where I've had to run stuff locally, mocking the event locally. Right. So I don't know if that's a pain in the ass, but at least for I would call them almost scripting projects. Even though I did them in Go, it still felt like little scripts I was writing to just handle some stuff.
Yeah, interestingly, it's like we talked about the kind of developer experience of Docker and really making it resonate. And I compared that to Lambda, and I think it's fair to a degree. It's fair in the results side, but the developer experience of Lambda when it comes to things like that, like running things locally and like what's my development kit and all of that, there are good answers to that, but it definitely has taken a while to get there. And I would say the thing I always refer to people to is things like the serverless framework. There are basically open source third-party frameworks out there that are...
serverless is wonderful.
It's great. It's great.
I used serverless. Sorry to interrupt. I used serverless.
No worries.
I was there was a tool that our customer support people wanted to use, one of those multiple inboxes tools where everyone can sort of process the same emails, and there were some webhooks, but they wouldn't handle the authentication against an API, so you couldn't modify the headers, you couldn't, so I kind of had to create, in this case I created a Google function to just do the authentication against the third-party service so that I could bring in the necessary, and then the formatting on this tool was also really bad, so I just did the pre-formatting, the cleaning up of the JSON array, and then sent that back. And so I did that as a Google function, and again, just so wonderfully quick and crisp and clean, and just a wonderful way to do that. But as far as the local development goes, I was able to mock a lot of that with the serverless framework. And then also the serverless framework gets you going, and kind of with the little templates and all that. It's a lovely, I love it.
It reminds me back of the early days of like Rails, right? When it was like, oh, cool. Like I just run a couple commands and it like generates all the scaffolds and I'm good to go. Like I remember when that was like the hot thing, right? Like honestly, some of the biggest like leaps in technology have been when you really hone in on that developer experience, right? Like empowering developers to like do incredible things quickly and not have to worry about stuff. That's all my favorite technologies have been, right? Rails has been one of my favorite technologies. I never, I'm a Python guy, so like I used other things that were in that vein, but like I always had a great deal of respect for sort of Rails for innovating in that area, being like, you know what? Am I the most powerful thing in the world? No. I don't handle every single corner case and every single thing in the world, but at the end of the day, my developer experience is second to none, right? You run a few commands, you have a fully functional application, and that's what serverless framework can help you with. That's things like Amplify, right? Docker, all of these things that have been the most effective and most exciting bits and pieces in technology in the past like 20 years have really been things that make developers' lives awesome.
And I think that part of that is that feeling that, and I'm reflecting on when I started doing Rails generators and all that. There was just a feeling that I wasn't trying to do it my way. I was just doing it the right way. There was no debate about, when you set up your API sort of methods and all that. It was just with the generators, it was just done correctly. So I didn't have to worry about, am I doing it in some weird, obscure way that no one else is understanding. And I even find that with 7 CTOs, like the journey to just best practice or what are other people doing. It's real, man. I mean, in this technical tsunami, I mean, people do not know am I doing it right? And I think this goes back to the Kubernetes thing. It's like, whoa, shit, everyone's talking about Kubernetes. I should be doing it. No, you shouldn't be doing it.
I mean, should you understand it to enough of a level to know whether or not you should use it? Yes. But should you be doing it just by de facto because everybody else is? No. That's exactly. It's not the logical answer, right?
Yeah.
Totally with you.
So I've had some thoughts about you in my hot tub.
Oh yeah? I'll take it. I'll take it. Mostly, that's when most people think of me. I think when they're. in their hot
I've
tubs.
had some thoughts about you in my hot tub. Actually, it's annoying because almost every time I go into my hot tub now, I inevitably have a thought about you. Are you okay with this? You cool?
Yeah, we're getting into a real weird zone here, but
Okay.
I'm all for it, man.
Okay,
Let's make it
cool,
happen.
cool. Thanks for riding with me. So every time I get into my hot tub, I think to myself, all the buttons I need to push just to get the thing to turn on and turn it off and turn on the jets and turn off the jets and increase the temperature and decrease the temperature. And the solution to that, the progressively, has been manually flipping valves
Yeah.
and dials to having a wonderful app built by someone who I think was still stuck in the 70s. Wonderful, amazing mobile device, but the UI to get into those levers and valves, it's almost the same. I almost just want to go and pull levers versus even using this app. It drives me absolutely nuts. And then the other thing about a HomeKit or about using automation in your house is you still have to go to this damn device that you're trying to free yourself from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like now, half the time I'm on my phone, my kids think I'm doing emails, and it's only because I'm trying to change the music on Sonos. I'm trying to update my this or it's just like I'm trying to remote the Apple TV. It's just it makes me so sad and it just exhausts me. But back to my hot tub, and that's when I think about you, Jonathan.
All right.
And so a while back when we spoke, you just gave me this incredible overview of how you built this little, I think it was a Siri-based I'm busy, stay out, or something that you did for your kids where you gave them this wonderful, and you just quickly gave me a description of how you did it. And I was just thinking to myself, what I need to have in my hot tub is a jonathan.com that I can just say, hey computer, turn on the hot tub.
Yeah.
Computer, turn off the hot tub.
Yeah.
Hey,
that's
computer,
what we all need, right?
Maybe 5 degrees warmer.
Yes.
So if I was to do that, if I said to you, Jonathan, I know you're a aficionado in many aspects, how would we design that? Because we would need a voice box that could hear me say computer.
Yes.
Then I would need to route the request, plug in probably to the Pentair API somewhere. Hopefully there is an API. I doubt whether this machine even has an API.
Mm-hmm.
But I would probably have to link up a voice recognition thing to probably mount it on my umbrella over the hot tub so it will always be listening.
Yep.
And then execute a Lambda to execute the API to turn it up or down. Talk to me.
Yeah, sure. So let me tell you, well, first of all, if it has an API, you're almost there, right? I'll tell you right now. Because it's actually, turns out home automation now is pretty amazing. Even the platforms that people, I think, kind of look down on. So like HomeKit is what I use in my house, right? And it's funny because I work for an AWS partner. You'd think I'd be a big, Amazon fan in this regard, and I'm not. It just doesn't, agree with my personal preference from a technology in my home, right? And I've got a bunch of Apple stuff, so it just makes more sense in that ecosystem. But all of these things have APIs and toolkits. So the thing you're talking about is a thing that I affectionately call the daddy board, and that's what my kids call it. Now, we're all working from home now.
Present tense or past tense?
What do you mean? On what? Lovingly refer to it?
Does it still exist, or
oh yeah,
the daddy board? Does it still exist, or did it used to exist?
It exists. It's on my door right now, and it's set to do not disturb right now. So, yeah, it's real. You want me to show you?
Please.
Okay,
Would
hold on.
I be able to? Can I execute
we can change
any
it right
commands to it? Do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, hold on. So the biggest scary part of context here is now there's no sign on my door telling my kids not to come in here. So there's a pretty decent chance that there's going to be a tiny human in here. But this is the daddy board. So you see how it says "Do not disturb" on it, and it has the emoji of a lady crossing her arms.
Yes.
Okay. Now I have on my desk a thing called a Stream Deck. Have you ever heard of a Stream Deck before?
No.
It's like a little like OLED like keyboard. So each button has like an OLED key, and then you can push it and it changes it. So I've got this is hooked into my home automation, so I can do it through Siri. And in fact, I'll do that so that you'll understand. So here's my phone. I'm going to hold down the button so I'm not going to trigger everybody else's when they're listening, saying the magic word. So I'm going to say, hold down the button and say, let's see, Daddy is available. Okay, and now it just turned green. It says available, and I can say, don't bother, Daddy. Back to do not disturb. I can say, Daddy needs quiet. Is it going to work? Yeah, there it goes. Quiet, please.
Wow.
All right. So don't bother, Daddy. So this is a Amazon Fire tablet. It is the cheapest one that exists. And I think it's like 5 years old. We got it for my son way back when because we didn't want to spend the money on an iPad because he was too little and he'd probably break it. So we got this thing, but eventually we got him an iPad and we just had this thing sitting around. So I built this in, I don't know, half a day. It's pretty easy to do. So there is this thing called Homebridge, which is a open source project that allows you to write your own custom accessories and plugins for HomeKit, which is Apple's home automation thing. There are similar APIs and services available for the Amazon one and everything else in between, right? There's one called Home Assistant. There's a bunch of them. But effectively, it's a little node thing. And I defined a switch, on-off switches. And actually, I defined it a 3-state switch, right? And so one switch, when it turns on, can turn off other switches. So if I say don't bother Daddy, it turns on the do not disturb switch and turns off the quiet please switch and the Daddy is available switch. And if I turn on this switch, it turns off those switches. All of that is handled internally through the state management in HomeKit. Super easy. All you have to do is say, this is linked to that, turn off and on. I have a blog post about this, and you can link out to this afterwards so people can do it if they want to. But at the end of the day, it's super easy. I have a tiny little web service that runs on, I have a Synology NAS in my house. It's just running all the time. And I have this 40 lines of code little web service written in Python that sits there. I can send it an HTTP request to tell it to, change the state of the Daddy board. And then the Daddy board itself is literally a full screen web browser pointed at that same web service that just shows the current state in a pretty HTML view, right? And so it's automatically refreshing every 5 seconds or something like that.
Okay.
And so when I change the state, it changes it in HomeKit. I can toggle it on my phone. I can toggle it with my voice. I can toggle it on my computer. Anywhere I have the home interface, and then just the interface on the Daddy board changes. It's pretty cool.
Let the record reflect that I am applauding. So I understand the refresh from the tablet to the web service. Yes. The how does it get from your voice to the web service is still unclear to me. So you say there's a home bridge.
So there's a home bridge is basically like a place where you can define accessories. So I've defined 3 accessories that are effectively on-off switches. And I actually don't think I ended up having to write any of the node code. I used a pre-existing plugin for Homebridge that lets you define switches, and you say, check this endpoint, this HTTP endpoint for the state of this switch, and check it every X seconds. And so I literally just configured that in HomeKit and said, look over here, in Homebridge, I should say, there is a switch. It's called Don't Bother Daddy. Hit this HTTP endpoint to determine if you're on or off. That's all it does, right? And then Homebridge internally manages the requests and responses and all that stuff. I just created the little teeny tiny web service that manages the state, right? And then because it is a native HomeKit accessory, and I've added it into my quote-unquote home, it just shows up on my phone, my iPad, my Mac, everywhere. And I have Apple's smart speaker. And so when I shout at it, turn this thing on or turn this thing off, it just does that.
Okay, so the HomeKit, so the Home Bridge is the service that shows up as an endpoint in HomeKit. Is that correct?
Not exactly. HomeBridge is a service that you can run, that you can define new home accessories. So things like light switches and light bulbs,
and that shows
TVs
up.
and
That
stuff.
then shows up in HomeKit or
Correct.
in the Home app. So I'm still struggling with how. So the voice is handled then directly between Siri and the
Right.
HomeKit app, whatever.
Exactly.
That triggers the accessory that you defined with HomeBridge.
Correct.
Is that running on your? Is that the thing that's running on your Synology system?
Exactly. So I have two things running on my Synology in Docker containers. So the first is I have HomeBridge running in a Docker container. And inside that, I have three accessories defined. I have a bunch of things, but for the purposes of Daddy Board, I have three switches defined, and they're using a plugin called HTTP Switch, and I give it a name. One of the names is Daddy is available, and I tell it that the switch is a stateful switch, meaning it has an on state and an off state, and you provide it with three endpoints. So I give it an on URL, an off URL, and a status URL, and then I tell it check every 5 seconds. And so what it does is when I go into the HomeKit or the Home app on my iPad or my iPhone and I toggle the switch on, HomeBridge is then sending the HTTP request to the service that I have running in a Docker container on my Synology that I wrote that tracks the state. And then I have my little web browser running on this Fire tablet that's Velcroed to my door of my office. It is continuously just refreshing itself every few seconds and pulling what the current state is.
What a terrible waste of energy, Jonathan.
Oh, it's massively inefficient, but it works.
Okay,
Remember,
so
the whole world is held together by terrible PHP.
Yes,
Come on.
yes. So okay, so in my world, I would then use the same input. I would speak into my phone and say, "Yo, hot tub on,"
Yep.
and then
You could do that.
then it would connect probably in the same. I also have a Synology, so I could probably do the same setup.
Yep.
The unknown here would just be how do I interface with the Pentair thing.
Find out if it has an API,
Yes.
and you and I can have a hackathon sometime when next
I
time
would
I'm down
love
in San
that.
Diego,
I
which
would love
should
that.
happen relatively soon, right? We didn't find a place, but we did sign with a real estate agent yesterday to talk about putting our house on the market here in LA. So, no decision yet, but we're thinking San Diego is going to be where we end up. So,
Okay. Is it okay if this is on the podcast?
yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Because I would consider it a mini victory for the San Diego tech scene to get someone from the LA tech scene.
Well, there you go. I don't know if I could call myself some sort of player in the LA tech scene, but that's why I wanted to go to San Diego, is because maybe I can make a bigger splash there.
I love it.
I just have to compete with you, right? I can make that happen. So interestingly, though, on the hot tub, so I also use HomeBridge to control my grill, which I think we talked about last time, right?
No, we didn't.
maybe
And
we
all talk about that.
How did we not talk about this? So I have a smoker, like a big green egg. Have you ever heard one of those before?
Yes,
It's like a
yes.
charcoal grill and smoker,
Yes.
and I have this little it's actually a MIPS microcontroller like thing with a CPU fan that plugs into the air intake on the bottom, and it has a couple of like temperature probes. You put it inside, and I can it's a commercial thing you buy, and you can just plug it in, and it I didn't do any of that part, but it does have an API. So I actually wired it into HomeKit, and so now I can say Siri, what's the temperature of my big green egg? And I actually expose it as a thermostat. Wow. So it's incredible because there's a thermostat type of thing in HomeKit because, so I have two thermostats. I have a thermostat for the temperature of the grill, and I have a thermostat for the temperature of whatever it is that I'm cooking in the grill. And so I can be like, Siri, what's the temperature of my big green egg? And it'll say, your big green egg is currently at 223 degrees and warming up to 225, right? And I can actually set it as well. I can say set it to 250, and then it turns on a little air intake fan and sucks in more oxygen, feeding the charcoal and making it hotter. I did a whole like presentation at a bunch of AWS events about this. It all runs on AWS. It has a website, so there's actually charts and graphs of all my cooks, and you can see like all of the data stored in a big data lake in S3, and it's all built on Lambda. It's super fun.
So I definitely need you to do that presentation to us.
Yeah, for sure.
That is something I very much like about you is sort of the whenever I talk to you, I feel excited by technology again. Why is that?
I'll take that. Because technology is exciting, and you just have to have somebody to talk about it with.
No, I think it's because of your indie web, like this can be done. Like I think a lot of times when I think about technology, I've been coding since I can remember, and I started coding like little, keeping track of my pocket money or keeping track of the top 40 songs as they went up and down the charts. And I think I was like 11 years old when I did this. But as it becomes something that you study and you get your computer science degree, you take all these tech jobs, your hobby becomes your profession, which no longer is your hobby. And I think maybe that's what I'm trying to say is I feel like technology is genuinely a hobby of yours as well as, your life. And so, or maybe it isn't. Maybe you just have a passion for technology as the CTO of Mission. You love seeing problems solved, but you also have this hobby thing, which I find super inspiring. That's why I think about you when I'm in my hot tub.
I think it's just because anytime anyone is boiling in water, they want to think about me. But you're not wrong. Like I definitely, there was a time in my life, I've been programming like you since as long as I can remember. I remember my first program that I wrote. I still have it. I still have the computer that I wrote it on in my parents' basement. I don't even know if it turns on anymore, but I do love technology, and I would say it's definitely a hobby, but I will say that, over time, as you're working professionally in technology, it does get exhausting from time to time. You want to go home and unplug and not really be, fully connected in what's going on in technology. But I still do multiple projects a year where it's just like, you know what, this would be a really fun thing that gets me excited about technology again, right? And I'll do a thing like the smoker controller that I worked on, or the daddy board, which is solving a real problem for me during COVID. Like, this is an actual problem that I had, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to throw some technology at it and fix it. And it was a blast, and it got me excited again. And so I think it's important, like, I definitely feel like the hobbyist side has faded a bit. I haven't had nearly the amount of time that I would like to work on my own personal website and to blog and all of that. As I would want. I've been a little bit disengaged with the indie web community of late, not because I don't believe in it anymore, but just I've been busy, right? There's other things going on in life. But I do think it's important as technologists, as CTOs, to like occasionally rekindle that flame. You know what I mean?
I think so. And actually, just listening to you, I'm just kind of scanning through. And the question for me is, like, just thinking about the daddy board, it's like, how did you... Like, for me, the solution to that was just to lock my door or give people really stink eyes when they come in during recording of podcasts or work. Yeah. But I think you had a disposition that said, okay, this is a fun problem to solve, and I can actually have a lot of fun, especially integrating all these really exciting interfaces that have come up in the last 5 years.
Right.
So I just I find myself wanting to know how does one keep that? How do you keep kindling that flame? If I think of I have a good friend who.
Go ahead.
I think I keep thinking, I have a friend who keeps challenging me on like, what are you, where are your fun coding projects, or what are you doing that's fun? And this has turned into a bit of a personal therapy session, but I just find myself listening to your stories thinking, where is that guy that used to do that stuff? Now I just CTO stuff and talk about the challenges of how to grow and scale technology to help these startups. But where is my little daddy project?
To make you feel a little bit better about this, I have a kind of a thread with a bunch of friends on text, former coworkers, people I've worked with for years and years. And one of them earlier today was like, hey, what are you all using now in Python land for killing processes reliably in a cross-platform way? And my reply was, I mostly make spreadsheets and PowerPoints now, so you can just ignore me. So I suffer from this too, right? But, you know, how do you scratch that itch? How do you rekindle that flame, right? It's sort of like renewing your like wedding vows, right? Like, you know, you got to fall back in love again. Any problem that can be solved with like your hot tub thing, like, dude, you've got to solve that. By the time we talk next time, I expect you to deliver me a report about whether or not there's an API. We can put together a strategy. We'll hack it together. We'll have some beers and we'll make it work, right? And it'll be fun.
That'll be my housewarming gift to you.
There you go.
So
hot tub? Thanks, man. It's real nice of you. My kids will love it.
No, that's cool, man. No, I think that's an inspiring note, you know, for me to think on, and I think that effort it requires to turn that into a fun project, because I could see that being a fun project for my kids as well, because they're constantly saying, Daddy, the hot tub's too hot, or can I listen? You know, one of the Sonos problems we have is, again, uber first world problems, is my kids want to listen to the same story every night. And so we have Sonos, so it's pre-Alexa integration. So every time I've got to go open my app, I've got to go find Winnie the Pooh, and I have to go press play, and then there's a timer issue where I wake up at 2 a.m. and the story is still playing, and I think why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah,
Jonathan, why am I doing this to myself?
I completely agree. It's so funny, like literally you could just take that entire explanation you just had and you could transplant it over to some sysadmin sitting in front of a thing running the same 45 commands again to restart the web server, pull the new thing, and be like, you know what? You could solve this with a shell script, right? So it's time to automate yourself out of fatherhood. That's what I think, right? Like, let's make this happen.
Good stuff, brother. Well, that was awesome, man. I love having you in the community and having these conversations. So, anything else? Anything you want to touch on, or?
No, man, it was a great conversation. I love being a part of the community, and you know, hanging out with all the other folks in 7 CTOs has just been an absolute blast. It's an amazing place to connect with others and share your challenges, and you know, it's an invaluable resource to me. So I'm super happy to be a part of it, and couldn't be happier that we had an opportunity to meet as well.
Yeah, so I love it. Thank you, brother. It warms my heart. So I'll talk to you soon again.
Sounds good.